A reading summary of 10 Thick Guys You Should Know on John Wesley. This chapter commences with one of the most prominent events in John Wesley's life that came to label Wesley as a brand plucked from the burning. Here we identify the events leading up to that naming. He was in a Epworth rectory. That's probably the place that his father was living, Samuel Wesley, who was a local minister with the Church of England, having just escaped from a fire that hit their house. They realized to their horror that there was one child who was missing, 5-year-old John Wesley. There was no other ways to reach him by this time, since the family had escaped. They left behind John Wesley in the burning house, knelt down in prayer, and committed John's life to God. John Wesley was apparently asleep, and it wasn't the heat of the fire nor the smoke that woke him, but the bright light of the approaching inferno. In John's own words, he put his head out of the curtains and saw streaks of fire on top of the room. It was this time that he caught the attention of his neighbors, who formed a human ladder that allowed John Wesley to escape from this inferno. As a result of this event, John Wesley came to be known as a brand plucked from the fire or from the burning. The words spoken over him by his mother, Susanna. This house fire event would not be a one-time display, but a continuous defining moment of God's providence in the life of John Wesley. Now, why is that the case? Because besides this event, John Wesley would again be struck with another near-death incident in 1753, a serious illness from which he thought that he would not recover. So he would reaffirm Zechariah 3:2, the brand plucked from the burning, as uh, as something that characterized the providence of God over his life. Not just the one-time event when he was 5 years old and caught in the house, but once again at age 50, when John Wesley came down with illness, he would really remind himself of this promise of God over him, that he was a brand plucked by God out of the fire. And indeed, the impact of John Wesley upon the Western Church was palpable. He would go on to fulfill his destiny as one of the most recognized English churchmen in the 18th century, the leader of the evangelical revival, as well as the father of Methodism. But as noted in the notion of the brand plucked from the fire, uh, Wesley's life would continuously characterize that, as his journey would not be a straightforward but a circuitous one. He would have to overcome many obstacles in life and many difficulties in fulfilling such a grand destiny and the legacy that he would leave for the generations to come. We begin tracing Wesley's life account from his birth, 1703, as one of many children born to Samuel and Susanna. Samuel subscribed to High Church Anglicanism, whereas Susanna held strict Puritan discipline. As a product of his parents, John Wesley grew up with his father's bookishness so love for books and for reading and studying, and his mother's focus on practical pastoral theology. He's also famously labeled as a folk theologian. So this is a well-recognized term that describes John Wesley. John was homeschooled until age 11, until he went to boarding school. At age 18, he graduated with a BA from the University Christ Church, Oxford. Age 20 marks a significant turning point for him, or rather, he was at crossroads at that point, deciding between higher education or ordination at the Church of England, following in his brother and father's footsteps. Age 19 would be an important year for him, which marks John Wesley's first conversion. This was a time of a moral awakening, and some of the events that transpired here was his frequent conversation with his mom, his roughing out of whether to seek ordination or not, his convictions to and his allergies to Calvinist doctrines. He was also reading some of these books: Thomas à Kempis of The Imitation of Christ, Jeremy Taylor, Rules and Exercises of Holy Living and Holy Dying, and William Law's two books, A Treatise on Christian Perfection and A Serious Call to a Devout and Holy Life. What this meant for Wesley was that outwardly, he displayed a quest for holiness in terms of austerity, discipline, and religious zeal and passion. Inwardly, he engaged in deep examination, yearning for more holiness. He remarked that he sought for a renewal of soul in the image of God, a complex habit of lowliness, meekness, purity, faith, hope, love of God and of men. He was also part of what we now call the Holy Club, who were the original Methodists who endeavored to work together in the Christian fellowship in a very uh, disciplined, methodical way. Some of his words from during that time: "I might continue endeavor to keep his whole law, inward and outward, to the utmost of my power. I was persuaded that I should be accepted of him." So this really characterized the 1725 period when John Wesley turned 19. It was a moral awakening, and there was some conviction to do good, to turn away from what is bad. As we observed, some of the things that he did was reading books, outward works of religion, and inward examination of his his spiritual state. In the church ranks, he was also made deacon in 1725 and priest in 1726. However, all that being said, this was not, for the most part, an evangelical conversion. It was still sort of a hazy season for John Wesley, as he says that he was utterly ignorant of the nature of and condition of justification, and he sometimes confused it with sanctification. So he thought that by adding works onto himself, that he could find justification in God, but he found himself very much confused, even as he strived to do more religious works and works of charity. Now, John Wesley wasn't going to end there at his first conversion. This was, of course, prelude to what we understand as his second conversion, the heart strangely warm experience at Elder's Gate. His major triggers for the Elders Gate experience came from two encounters, but two memorable encounters with Moravian brethren. The first being when he was sailing across Atlantic Ocean for his Savannah mission works. For Wesley, that was when during a sea storm, he encountered a group of Moravians who had assurance that they were not afraid of death, even as the waves and the billows hit against the ship. John Wesley's second um, memorable encounter with Moravians was with Peter Bowler, with whom he had a deep dialogue about the understanding of faith. John Wesley highlighted the potential absence of faith in his own life. And these are the famous words that Bowler actually spoke to him. Preach faith until you have it. And then, because you have it, you will preach faith. Is the quote in the book. So Wesley treasured and he followed this advice. Now, this is something that will continue to follow him in his life as later on he embarked on the third phase of his life, which was when he began to become an itinerant field preacher of one book, which will be captured in much detail in the next section. Before that, however, we will not do justice to John Wesley's biography if we do not highlight the major turning point of his life on May 24th, 1738 at Aldersgate Street. And the following words are what eventually came to be, as mentioned here, enshrined in the evangelical folklore. Wesley notes about a quarter before 9, that's 8:45 a.m., while he was describing the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warm. I felt I did trust in Christ, Christ alone, for salvation, and an assurance was given me that he had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. Now, surely this continues to be celebrated among Methodists as Elders Gate Day every May 24th. It marked a momentous event for Wesley where God had finally answered his prayer and given him the assurance and the evangelical conversion that he had been seeking for. With that, we launch into the next phase of Wesley's life. This is a highly detailed section that recorded what the author labeled as the third conversion of John Wesley, although not a very popularly accepted notion, since most people only refer to John Wesley's first and second conversion and make this as an annex to his second conversion, which was Aldersgate. Not to belabor this point, but this phase will be characterized by John Wesley's relationship with the ministry of itinerant field preaching. Itinerant field preaching. Itinerant field preaching is contrasted against parish preaching, which is that you preach within the church walls and at the pulpit itself. And John Wesley did something quite radical for his time in going beyond the church walls to reach the fields of people that were laying out there in the world that were not situated in the church themselves. He became the evangelist to those who were outside of the church and not sitting in the church pews. So this first section will treat John Wesley as primarily as a preacher himself. We'll also handle some of the objectives and motivations of John Wesley, the preacher, the itinerant field preacher. How also he handled objections and the specific methods he used in terms of homiletical techniques and the advice that he would hand down to those who follow after him. So the author of this chapter, Ian Maddock, notes that John Wesley was many things, right? He was author, editor, translator, hymnist, amateur physician, teacher, organizer, but above all else, a preacher. A preacher. So his major and highest ambition was to be Homo unius libri, a man of one book. And recall in the previous section that we actually treated this when Peter Bowler's treasured advice in his heart was preach faith until you have it, and then when you have faith, you preach it. By the end of John Wesley's life, he would have traveled over 250,000 miles, preaching an estimated 40,000 sermons. Another contemporary of his that kind of paralleled his ministry was George Whitefield, who likewise subscribed to and even was the one who actually pioneered open field preaching and introduced that to him. So George Whitefield was the first one who actually went to preach in the coal mines, out in the field, outdoors, beyond the parish, and was the one who influenced him. So these two men actually, their ministry are typically compared in parallel. We will return to George Whitefield later on. However, we can, in the following, deep dive a little bit into John Wesley's journals to read his words and to find out what exactly of a view that he made of preaching. In fact, he said preaching is one of the things that actually contributed to his good health, as is seen by these two quotes here. He said, "This I got wroth, chiefly by my constant exercise, my rising early and preaching morning and evening." 2 years later, he said a similar thing. "I find no more pain or bodily infirmities than at 5 and 20. This I still impute to my constant preaching, particularly in the morning." So a very high view of the preaching ministry prescribed by John Wesley. We shall consider how this all began in the first place. It was since George Whitefield in February 1739. And note that this is barely even 1 year from Elders Gate. It was George Whitefield's love for itinerant preaching that influenced John Wesley. He was the one who so-called dragged John Wesley along in this ministry. To be sure, John Wesley identified himself more as a high churchman until he watched George Whitefield preached in late March 1739. He caught the vision of George Whitefield, and he noticed how until that point the church's parish system hasn't caught up with the societal trends, rapid urbanization, especially in coal mining regions in England's west and north. And he thought, who will reach all these unreached people? And since that time, he had been convinced of his calling to them, declaring that the whole world is now his parish. He decided to preach his very own Sermon on the Mount. And as we know, that happened out on a mountain, right? Not in a church, not in a traditional church setting. In Wesley's own words, he had submitted to be more vile, and he proclaimed in the highways the glad tidings of salvation. Then he went on to cite the scripture that was in Luke chapter 4, uh, the words of Jesus uh, that Jesus cited from the book of Isaiah. He began to weigh and to contrast between the ministry of the parish versus the ministry of field preaching. And having weighed the both, he came to a conclusion that the ends justified the means. It's the only way to reach out to these people and to reach out to the harvest field where there are many lost souls. He noted that this concerned the eternal destiny of many people. If he would not reach them, they would be lost. And it was to the extent that John Wesley tied his own salvation to his success in obeying this call of itinerant field preaching. From my own perspective, and as I read the Bible as well, this really kind of coheres with Ezekiel's idea in Ezekiel 3, where it speaks about the Son of Man having to warn people, otherwise the blood of these men and women would be on his hand. This was not to suggest that, however, John Wesley particularly favored or liked his itinerant field preaching ministry a lot, as opposed to George Whitefield, who had a very romantic notion of itinerant preaching. He was passionate about it. He really loved it and liked this kind of work. Opposingly, John Wesley actually kind of disliked it. He saw it more as a responsibility. He was very much reluctant as an itinerant field preacher, and he saw this work, right? He saw this work as a responsibility than uh than a treasured ministry. So that was really John Wesley's approach to this task that he so often engaged in. And although he didn't have personal liking toward field preaching, he vehemently defended it as his own duty, as his own calling. While in this quote here, you note that there is no there is no gain to be received from the work of ministry of itinerant preaching at all, other than the fact that it can reach souls, it can win souls, other than the fact that there are obvious gaps in the work of the parish ministry and its ineffectiveness in reaching out to the people who are working in the marketplace, in the coal mines. As previously noted, the ends justified the means, and he famously remarked that he did more good preaching standing on top of his father's tombstone in Epworth than he did preaching for 3 years from his pulpit. So that was the high value that he ascribed to this effective ministry of field preaching. For John Wesley, it was something that made sense, it was effective, it was efficient, and it reached the masses. It met people where they were. In the following section, from this point onwards, we note John Wesley's homiletical notes, the methods that he prescribed, right, to himself as well as to preachers who will follow after him in the way that they use their words for their sermons. Here, here likewise is remarked John Wesley's pastoral motivations. He was very intentional about the audience that he had, the less privileged, and the not necessarily very educated people that he was preaching to in the field. Although Wesley himself was highly educated and great with words and very scholarly and very academic, he intentionally cut out long sentences and multi-syllabic words from his vocabulary to preach plain truth to plain people. He met people where they were. He was intentional about his audience and in catering the sermon to meet their needs. And this was also later what he imparted to others as well. He made detailed and practical lists of rules aimed at eliminating a range of faux pas among his preachers. So he would teach his peers the same things as well. He was concerned with the entire homiletical package, not just the contents of the preaching. So the way that is delivered, he went down to the specifics, such as the hermeneutics of the preacher. Be careful not to allegorize or spiritualize too much, and take care of how you speak. Hallowed, not hollowed, for example. So he went so detailed into even pronunciation and articulation as well. Okay, so that's not the end to all the notes of Wesley's ministry. Uh, on top of preaching as well, he would also have a particular focus on sowing and watering. And what that meant was that the focus on continuing to develop people in the faith, the work of discipleship. So this was seen in the frameworks, systems, structures, and societies that he created. As opposed to Whitfield, who delivered on impression of impassioned eloquence, Wesley left a heritage of Methodist societies. Because of this continuous sowing and watering of the ministry, at the time of his death, there were about 72,000 members in the Methodist Church across the British Isles, including Ireland. He paid so much attention to the institutions that he set up, such that he even opposed the Bishop of London when he refused to ordain the Methodist preachers serving in the American colonies. So he contradicted the Bishop of London in ordaining Thomas Cook to serve as the superintendent of the newly found Methodist Episcopal Church, ascribing weight to this ministry of discipleship, setting up of societies. He was sure to insist on the structures that will create longer term discipleship and the formation of the Methodist denomination. In this following section, we note the heart of Methodism. It was a primarily working class ministry, so it was aimed at reaching the typical workman. And John Wesley was known to defend the ordinary folk and those who label poor people as idle. So the Methodists quickly formed a group that was known for their care for people's spiritual and physical welfare. It became a fundamentally compassionate and caring society of Christians. Another influence that John Wesley had on evangelicalism is his influence upon William Wilberforce. And he even spoke prophetically to Wilberforce in encouraging him in his ministry with these words here. Nonetheless, the Methodists began to prosper materially. and many of them became rich. And what that meant for John Wesley was that now he had to address a group of people that has changed quite significantly in terms of their socio-economic status. So his ministry evolved with the evolving needs of his congregants. And towards the later stages of Methodism, he began to preach against the love of money. Sermons like on dress, the dangers of riches, on worldly folly, the dangers of increasing riches began to emerge from John Wesley's pulpit. And if I may add, I also personally have heard before another sermon entitled Lay Not Up. So John Wesley has a famous mantra, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. Something that he followed through with consistently in his lifetime as well. Now, with all the good things that we have mentioned about John Wesley, there's a temptation perhaps for us to halo him or to put him on a pedestal. Yet, Ian Maddock also highlights some of John Wesley's shortcomings. We should note that John Wesley was far from being all perfect. He also suffered in his marriage, which ended in separation, and the fact that he only knew about his wife's death after she had been buried. He was also known for being autocratic and imperious, which is very characteristic of high-performing people in the church. And also, maybe by his own design as well, nobody managed to succeed him as the leader of Methodism. There was no uniting Methodist figure that successfully took his place after John Wesley had passed on. And imperfect as he was, he offers us many lessons. There are still many of his merits that we can learn from. John Wesley is also a very humble person who was able to be all things to all men. He also had a paradigm for financial management that showed that he would really have a very loose rein on money as well. He probably managed his finances very well, but he was very huge on giving, which highlighted also his generosity with money. He was also a very hardworking and diligent man in all that he does. He really do it with all his heart and with all his energy and vigor as well. So with all that being said, as a whole, we see in John Wesley, man who is weak, imperfect, lack of assurance, didn't know what to do, doesn't have the whole picture ahead of him. Yet a very humble person, able to meet people where they are, able to manage his finances in a good way, a very generous person, very hardworking, very diligent. And yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention was great with systems. I mean, he created, he was apostolic in that sense. He created an entire, started an entire denomination and enacted a succession plan that ensured its continuity even to present day. I mean, few of us have not heard of the word Methodist. Wherever we go, there's a Methodist church in many parts of the world that we don't even know of. His movement became such a widespread thing that reshaped not just England, but America and the entire world in an irreversible way.